When I was a little girl, I used to love fairy tales. Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, it was my favorite. I was always encouraged how they would take something so broken and it would end up so beautiful. Well, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize life is not a fairy tale at all. It's very real. But God can take our brokenness and He can make something so very beautiful. So join me as we explore chapter by chapter stories of faith, determination, and courage of people that you may very well know. You may not think you do, but we all have a story to tell.
My name is Heather Penn, and this is my story. When I was a little girl, I remember my mom and dad being there till I was about 5, and they divorced. I remember being such a daddy's girl. I really would follow him and do a lot of things with him, and so I remember those sweet memories of Jeep riding with my mom and dad, and the times of just curling up in the bed. I liked to sleep with them at night, so I'd curl up in the bed with them, and just how precious those times are to me, to remember those. My mom was pregnant about that same time of divorcing. At that time, she got pregnant with my sister, and so I remember her being there, but being there just in a single parent home. So I can remember that being so traumatic on us, and just my mom would be upset and couldn't get off the couch for hardly days, and even be able to hardly, make me something to eat. That's when I learned how to make peanut butter and jelly and little things like that to help her, because I wanted to do something to help her. I remember ever since being a little girl having that in me to jump right in there and help my mom, whatever it was that she had to do, and wanted to be her right-hand man. Then about the age of 8, my mom remarried to my stepdad, and he helped raise me from that time up until, through my teenage years. We started going to church at what was called Gospel Fellowship then. It's now Life in Christ. So I've been in our church since I was about 5 to 6 years old. I met my best friend there, and still best friends with her today, and so it's neat that we go back all the way to that age, being in church together. But we were involved big time in the youth group, and so I remember looking back as a teenager, the biggest things that stick out to me is being in youth and being with everybody. And we went on mission trips. We went to the Navajo Nations with the West family, being our youth pastors, and then we got to go to Lima. I got to go at 16, 17 years old to Lima, Peru, with one of my other good friends that was in the youth with us at that time. And so those are like some of the biggest things that stick out to me, getting to be raised in church and being, involved in youth group and in our church. So at the age of 13, I started dating a guy, and that's when things changed for me. He was doing a little bit of dabbling with drugs, and so I wanted to fit in with that. And so that's when I first started smoking pot at the time. And so I started playing with those things. I can't say that I was all in, because I had a lot of good, just being raised in church, a lot of good in there. But I started veering off and trying things and just trying to really fit in. And I really remember it just helping me. I was real insecure as a teenager, and so it helped me to not worry about what everybody thought, or just to feel lighthearted. And I really, that pulled me in a little bit more, because it just took away all the worries and the cares and the different things that I was feeling on the inside. I would go for periods of time of being really good, I would say, in church, involved in the youth, doing things right. And then there would be another period of time that I would kind of get sideways again. And so my life kind of had a cycle of going back and forth from good to not doing so good. And then I went through a period of time that I was kind of pulling back the wrong direction, and that was in my senior year of high school. And so the last 3 months of my senior year, I actually got into a pretty good argument with my mother. We worked together at the time. And so she had found some stuff that I had hidden from her, and we had a kind of a blow up, and I decided I was running away. So I packed my bags and was off, and I was gone for about 2 to 3 months just running constantly. I had some try to come and find me. My dad came once. I had a youth pastor come once, and I about ran over my dad, actually, just trying to get away from him. I was just determined to run as hard and fast as I could away from all that. The very last of my senior year, I came back at the last week of my high school and got to finish my portfolio and actually graduate high school. Before having ran away, I had not straight A's, but A's and B's, and had really good grades. And so I just had to finish my portfolio, and thank God for Carol West helping me, because I definitely wouldn't have got to do it without her. We finished my portfolio and I got to graduate. But a week later, I found out that I was pregnant with my first son, Gage, on my 18th birthday. When I found out I was pregnant with Gage, I remember my mom and stepdad and sisters, we had went to Disney World, so kind of celebrating graduating and everything. We went there for vacation, and I didn't feel good the whole vacation. I was tired. I just kept wanting to go to the room and sleep, and my mom knew then. She's like, something ain't right. She might be pregnant. And so we come back, and that's when we done a test and went and made sure that if I was or wasn't, and it was on my birthday, I found out I was pregnant with him. But it was so much emotion. We both cried. I can just still remember being so scared, just not knowing if I was ready or capable. But I just really ended up clinging kind of to my mom at that time, and just remember going through all that. I had applied to go to Rhema Bible College my senior year and got accepted, and so that was my direction and the way I was going. And then I ended up running away, and with that ended up pregnant with Gage, and so all that changed. I obviously wasn't going to college, a Bible college, in that kind of condition, so I moved in with Gage's dad, and I lived with him, having Gage, and we were a little bit in the drug scene and kind of kept dipping in that a little more and more. And so my life really went in that direction for quite some time. And so I was living, just out in the world, doing what the world does. And, things got ugly through that. Gage's dad and I were together for a couple years, and so we had a good relationship, but it was rocky too. So we would be off some, on some, and he really loved me. He did adore me. He was wonderful to me. He was an excellent dad. If he did anything right, he was just a wonderful dad to Gage, and so I'm so grateful for that and the time we had. But we did have a drug issue, and so with that comes a lot of problems and a lot of fights and all that happen. And we had a week of things not going so well. I had done some stuff, was kind of pulling away, not really wanting to know if I wanted to be with them or not be with them. We kind of had that kind of a rocky relationship anyway. And through that, we had a week of fighting, and it just was really rough. We had blown up, and he had went outside, and at that point had threatened that he would take his life. And he had threatened it a few times up to this point, but that this time really got me. And so I went out. I had Gage, he was a little fella, and he was about 1.5 years old, and I put him in the car, and we went and drove around because it was late at night and dark, and I drove around looking for him through the neighborhood, and found him, and we talked. I thought I had talked some sense into him, and he seemed okay finally. And so he said just that me and Gage could go in and put Gage to bed, and that he would be in shortly. And so I remember laying there in bed just praying, and putting Gage to sleep. I was so exhausted. I fell asleep hard that night. And then woke up the next morning to our neighbor screaming hysterically over me that his dad had took his life. And so she found him first, and then I'll never forget the moment of seeing that, and I could still see it, smell the air, see it was fall, seeing all the leaves. That's a moment that will probably always be there. Even though God's healed me of that moment will ever be etched in my life. As you can imagine, everything just escalated from there. I already had a drug abuse going on, and at that point I ran even harder into that, trying to deal with that, trying to numb that pain, trying to forget. And I would be up for days on end. I remember my 21st birthday. I can't even remember that whole week. I just was so hard and heavy into it, just running hard as I could. Anything I could get my hands on, I done. And so it was a very dark time in my life. I ended up in a lot of dark places through that, and through that I ended up in trouble a couple times. I ended up getting caught with drugs on me, drug paraphernalia, different stuff, and ended up in jail. And one of those times that was really a rock bottom for me was actually when I reached out to who is my husband now. And so we lived across the street growing up from each other, and even had done drugs a little bit together. We used to smoke pot on each other's front porches back in our teenage years. But he had actually been doing good at this point in his life. He'd been clean for a few years and even was preaching. And so I had reached out to him, just needing help. He was a friend, and so that was kind of our point of where he kind of come into my life. I ended up a couple days after seeing him in jail. I ended up getting about 3 months of time in jail, and spent that for some of the stuff I had gotten in trouble with. And then after that, I got out and was doing good. I got in some drug counseling and was getting help that I know I wouldn't be here today if I wouldn't have got the help that I got through that time. And even that's when I started seeing and talking with Chris through that. But I was such a mess on the inside. I wasn't ready for a relationship because I was such a wreck. I was so hurt. I was so insecure. I just almost completely hated myself. And so you can't love anybody if you don't love yourself. So I ended up going back, and I relapsed, and I went back. And that last relapse, I ended up pregnant with my second son, Gavin. And so through that, I had such a hard time. Addiction had such a hold on me. I really wanted to stop, and had such a hard time stopping that addiction. And I ended up mad, got into a big fight over Gavin's dad, and ended up throwing a log through a window and ended up on house arrest. And so that was my last really rock bottom moment, when I ended up on house arrest through that. But it's the moment that my world changed, and finally I was seeing the light, that I was coming out onto the other side. I was going back to church with my mom at that time, and there was only a few things I could do, obviously being on house arrest, so church was one of them, and I got to work a little bit. And so it really did slow me down to have to really look at life and start to see what I was doing and what I had done. And so I ended up, there was a pastor at our church at that time, and he had an altar call for if you wanted to be set free. And so I went up for that. I was really, really ready. I was ready to surrender completely to God, and was ready to be free from all of the drugs and all the lust addiction and all the addictions that I had found myself in. And so I remember going up to the altar and him praying over me, and I just knew that it was finally it. And he told me to mark down that date on the calendar, and I went home. It was in July of 2008, and I marked that date, and that was the day that God completely set me free. So here I am as a single mother with 2 boys, and I was free, but there was so much shame that was still weighing over me. All those thoughts kept coming up, all the things I had done. The enemy really used those to throw at me a whole lot through that period of my life. And after having Gavin, we knew something kind of wasn't right there. And he was only just a few months old, and we were told that he was blind and could not see at all. He had had a birth defect that affected his eyes and vision. And so I just knew that was the moment that I just knew I had to do what was right for my children. I had to get well and healthy on the inside. If I did nothing else, I had to be a good mama and raise those boys. And so it was such an emotional time. I had a really hard time finding out that Gavin could be blind. But at the same time, it drove me to my relationship with God. I really got into my devotion time with God and my quiet time with God, and went after God for myself. And just to find, I don't know, there was a healing I was believing for Gavin. There was a healing inside of me that needed to happen. And so that is where my relationship really, really started with walking with God. I had determined that I was going to be a good mom, a godly woman, and really had set my heart on that. I was determined I was going to be a success story, and I was going to be able to say one day I've been clean this many years, and that was something that I really set in my heart. And through that, Pastor Sue and Pastor Chris had started being the pastors at our church. And we didn't have Wednesday night services quite yet, so we were going over to Owensboro to what is now his church to drench services. So it was kind of like a night of worship. And so I had went with my mom to one of those on a Wednesday night, and I remember even just feeling shame, just the shame and this weight on me even going there that night. And through that, Pastor Brian of his church started ministering during kind of like an altar call through that. And he ministered about just the chains being broken and could even hear them hit the ground. And I remember leaving that service and felt finally free from the shame, that cloud just being lifted off of me, and being able to like take a breath of fresh air. And that was just such, I know, a monumental moment in my walk with God. Chris and I started talking again after having Gavin and had him a little bit, and I just knew there was a time before when we had dated, and I just knew then that he was to be my husband and who I would be with. And so this time, us getting back together, I had the healing process started in me, and was learning who I was in Christ and digging into that. And then, we both had decided to put God first in that relationship, and we were going to do it right, not by the world standards and how the way the world pulls you to do a relationship, but we were doing it God's way. And so we really set boundaries and tried to honor God in that relationship, and dated for about 2.5 years, and then ended up getting married. And through that, we had marriage counseling with Pastor and Sue, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that was such a big part of why I have a good marriage today. they taught us how to be married and what marriage looked like, and that it was more a covenant and not a contract. And I'm so, so grateful for Pastor Chris and Pastor Sue teaching us how to be married, and that, it's a growing thing and that you have to work on it. I had said about how we found out that Gavin was blind about at 3 months old. They had told us that, and I got to watch God heal him, and he sees today. He doesn't see super far, but he sees, and God touched Gavin and healed his vision and is still working and healing him, and it is just such a testimony to see God's healing power in Gavin's life too. God really does give you beauty for ashes. He give us Chris he's such a good father to the boys. That was such a big desire in my heart, is that a man would come and love my boys as his very own. The enemy really tried to take a dad away from us, and he really did restore, giving us a godly man to raise the boys and to love them as his own. We have a third child now that we had together, and I can honestly say that Chris loves each and every one of those boys, and that is something that is so precious to my heart. And then to see what God has done in our life and in the church, to be able to be leaders in the church, and to get to be in the positions that we are in has been one of the most fulfilling things in my life. Pastor Chris and Sue have taught us so much about leadership and have really invested in us as leaders, and I know without a shadow of a doubt I would not be who I am today without that guidance and that push. And many times when I was nervous and didn't think I had it in me to do it, that they just kept cheering us on, and to see the lives we've gotten to lead freedom groups out of that place of so much bondage and addiction. Chris come from a place of addiction too, and now we get to take what the enemy meant for our harm and kick the devil in the butt with it, teaching people freedom, and that they too can live a life of freedom and about a relationship and not a religion. And I've got just so many testimonies after testimonies of people's lives that have been really changed and set free through getting in those groups and getting to see people getting plugged into the church. We get the honor of teaching Growth Track in our church, and we get to help people get in and get connected, and that is such a blessing. We are called to be the body of Christ. It's not just one of us, it is all of us. And so to get to be a part of the church being built, that is such our heart, is building the church for Jesus Christ. We are the bride, and just getting the bride ready. And so, life is been a process. I can't say it all has come overnight. It has definitely been a journey and a process, but such a beautiful process of walking that out with God. First and foremost, God is first. He's the first part of my everyday, and I would not be here today if I didn't put him first. And it is just so vital and such a rich relationship. I can honestly say, taste and see that the Lord is good. He is so good. To be able to dive into a relationship with him. And today I don't run from things when things come at me. I run to Jesus, and he is so fulfilling, and he is more than enough, and he satisfies me. And drugs don't have to satisfy me. Drugs don't have to soothe me today. Jesus soothes me and satisfies me, and that is such an amazing thing to be able to even say. And so I'm just so grateful for all that God's done in my life, and just so excited to see that he's still going to use me for ministry. Even though I didn't get to go to Bible college, he's still using me to touch people's life and see people come to know Jesus, and to really have a relationship with him, and just to be his hands and feet here on this earth. And it's just so amazing. My name is Heather Penn, and that is my story.